So welcome to the second edition of the ADAMI Focus Online Talks. Our special guest today is Mr. ANDRIAN CANDU from Chisinau. We have, so he was already our patron in 2018 at the ADAMI Gala Award ceremony when he was the Speaker of the Moldovan Parliament. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Our host today is Carolin Ollivier. She's the editor-in-chief of the daily news program ARTE Journal of the French-German broadcaster ARTE. So thank you, both of you, because I think both of you probably have a very tight schedule, and we are very happy to welcome you here. So the topic today is again media and cultural or ethnic diversity in the Eastern Partnership countries. Of course, we will have a special focus on Moldova today a little bit, but we try to stay maybe also to make some parallels maybe, or to stay more in the region also. And how like different about the situation with minority issues, and how, for example, a situation with like powerful people or groups influencing the media, how does this have an impact on minorities and minorities in the media? So I want to inform everyone at the beginning that this event will take 45 minutes. We will have a talk between Ms. Ollivier and Mr. Candu, and then we have the possibility, everyone has the possibility to ask questions. So therefore I will show you now, because we would encourage you to ask the questions in live. If you want to do that, because it will be a more lively discussion like that. So I will show you now, just for 1 second, this function that Zoom has, so that you can raise your hand. So here, for those of you who don't know this function, you can come here to this, click on the participants, and then you will see on the right side the participants, and at the bottom you see this function, raise your hand. So then we can unmute you and you can ask the question live. If you are maybe too shy, you can also ask a question in the chat. But yeah, it would be interesting to ask the questions live. Okay, so now I will give the word to Carolin Ollivier, please.
Thank you very much, Philomena. I'm very happy to be here, to be your host. Hello everyone, and most of all, hello Mr. Candu. Happy to talk to you. Well, as we learned, we will talk about media, essentially, media and ethnic diversity. And when preparing for this talk, I took a look at the newest World Press Freedom Index in 2020. And it's a long list, and I had to go down very, very low in the list to find Moldavia. It's on the 91st, on place 91, position 91 out of 180. And it has fallen down 50 positions compared to 2013, a spectacular fall. What is the problem, Mr. Candu?
Well, first of all, let me start by also expressing the appreciation, gratitude, and thank you very much for organizing this event. Indeed, it was an honor for me to host the patronage 2 years ago when I was holding the position of the Speaker of the Parliament. And it's indeed very nice to be back in this reality of professional discussions about media and the cultural diversity and the protection of the minorities from a cultural point of view. So thank you. Well, Carolin, if you allow me to address to you in this way, Moldova went, I have a personal impression that we somehow cannot find our place, and that in terms of a systemic approach of how the media should be developed. Indeed, we have we had upside downs in the history, and that's due to transition period of time through which Moldova goes on every time in every cycle of political, let's say, cycles. It's a very small market, first of all, to start by this. So it's really very difficult to build a strong media as an independent media. When you have a market of, let's say, less than 10 million euro for TV and radio, and in terms of advertising and commercial, and you don't have any other mechanisms in place like cash rebate, for example, when you can get investments or foreign investments in the media, then it's becoming really very difficult to build media as it is as a outlets, TV outlets or radio outlets, or even to maintain a good media written media like newspapers or news or magazines. Of course, we have, in terms of legislation, fundamentals there is a regulator, which in most of the cases seems to be very politicized, and it's acting how the political color is, or what kind of political color in the country is. We have quite a new audiovisual code. It was approved 2 years ago, so still time for the implementation. And it's very well, with all these, moreover, media is quite, or the country, the region generally is quite exposed for everything we call disinformation and propaganda. Mm-hmm. And we are talking not only TV, but also online. We saw the techniques used, including by Russian Federation in many other countries. This is also valid for Moldova. When buying news and using news, you can influence decisions and the political situation in the country, and also to have impact on the security of the country. So still many other actions has to be taken by, and the responsibility with courage by the stakeholders in order to really have a free media in the country, and to have a better position in all the indexes, including in indexes worked out by prestigious organizations like, I don't know, Freedom House, Interrights, or Internews, or others. I was involved personally 2 years ago in working with the civil society. It was set up at that time a working group together with the civil society, with the experts also provided by European Union and Council of Europe, to work on the new audiovisual code and other legislation. Some of them still in the implementation process at the beginning stage, so it will take time for the implementation. Some of them remain only as a law and did not develop at all, and without any implementation, like, for example, and I'm very unhappy with this, because I thought it was a very good idea at that time to have cash rebate legislation, when you can get investments and to pay back cash 20 or 25% to a foreign investor if that foreign investor is investing in media in the country, in Moldova. At that time we were far ahead comparing to Romania or Ukraine, but then we lost the opportunity because Ukraine and Romania neighbor countries went further on, and now they have a very good market. Well, because of pandemic, of course, everything is slowing down and there is less attractive opportunities, but generally speaking, they went very well ahead in building the market for media, for movie production, for documentaries, for advertising, which at the end builds the entire market and gives the possibility to have an independent media.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you're saying it's economically not very interesting, but apparently it's politically very interesting, because one of the systematic problems in the country is the concentration of ownership in media. And there are some few oligarchs who own most of the media. And there's, of course, one flagrant example. It's your former colleague, the head of the Democratic Party, Vladimir Plahotniuc. You will help me with the pronunciation. Plahotniuc. Well, he owns, I think, four of the five or three of the five main televisions, then 3 radio stations. He controls 60% of the market. So now he's up and away of the country. You yourself, you switched, you left the party, you build up an own party, but the problem is still there, right?
The problem is not about the number of the TV outlets. The problem
but of the
is,
ownership. The ownership.
The problem is not only the ownership. The problem is the limitation of the market, and also the problem is the financing of the media. Because if you don't have a transparency in financing, if you don't have transparency including in the ownership related to the notion used for the businesses, which is called ultimate beneficial owner, and everything is concentrated via using proxies. For example, you gave the example of Mr. Plahotniuc. Well, Mr. Plahotniuc have at that time, and still he is open and transparent owner of some TV outlets. So he came up openly and said, yes, I own these TV stations and these radios. And it is business, so it is producing money and spending money. The problem is that there are many other stakeholders which they use the ownership via proxies. And when you have proxies and you don't have transparent ownership, then you have problems with illegal financing and the source and origin of those finances. And at the end of the day, this is a problem, because then you cannot keep responsible and keep someone responsible for the quality of the media, for transparency, for independency. And at the same time, as we could see what is happening in Moldova, to have a TV channel as a business, that's quite expensive. If I'm not wrong, to maintain a TV outlet costs around, let's say, minimum 100,000 or 50,000, let's say, per month. So count now how much money you need to invest to maintain a TV outlet, and put these figures in everything which is called the entire market of commercial or advertising. And you will see that actually the market or the business is not really a business, it's not feasible at all. And then, of course, this comes lack of transparency and the financing, and this is becoming a problem then, concentration and in not only in numbers, but lack of transparency.
Yeah, lack of transparency, and the question, of course, of political influence, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
As I see it, the media are correlating to political parties. So the media are influenced by their, you say it's not owners, but by their financiers. Would you say that that there is any independent media in Moldavia?
Well, yes, smaller TV outlets, but it's very fragmented, the market and the ratings. There are presumably independent TV outlets, but all of them have some, let's say, question marks behind. And this you can see during some political debates or political stronger or less stronger events in the country, which has a bigger impact. That will be seen definitely in autumn when there will be presidential campaign running. What we can see for 1 year, for this year already, that the President Dodon, the current President Dodon, has a very important media, let's say, empire, which stays behind him and speaks for him on his behalf. So on his behalf, so it's quite a strong media support, and it's not only about TV outlets, it's also about online, it's also about social network. Indeed, it's very politicized, I would say, the media, and it's very difficult. It's really very difficult to label a TV outlet as being independent. Even the public TV, even the public TV outlets, which are financed by the state, by the budget. So it's based on our tax, which we pay, all the citizens. In some political context, you also have questions about their independency.
So it's politically fragmented, and it's also ethnically fragmented. So you have some minorities more or less important in your country. A Russian minority, of course, Bulgarian minority, Gagauzien minority. Do they all have their own media?
Well, with the Russian minority, it's easier for the Russian speakers to have their own media because it's very much dominated by Russian language media, Moldova, generally speaking. Many TV channels from Russia are broadcasted in Moldova. And although we have some restrictions in the legislation in order to ban the broadcast from, let's say, products which are produced in other countries which are not members of the European Convention for TV broadcasting, and Russia is not part of that convention. Yep. So in terms of political talk shows, news, military character shows, these products should not be broadcasted in Moldova. But this law is not really very much obeyed by many TV channels or the operators, cable operators. And it's quite easy to buy, let's say, a card which you connect to some like NTV network, which is a Russian network, and it's easier to avoid the prohibition. In terms of other minorities, for example, the Gagauzien minority, which is populated in the south of Moldova, they have their own TV channels in that region, and they broadcast usually, unfortunately, less in Gagauzien, which is a Turkish dialect, more in Russian language. But there are some TV channels and radio channels which is for the Gagauzien. There are also some TV shows and hours provided by the public TV, which is a Moldova state TV channel. They also have some time which is given for the minorities. So I saw some of the shows in the Bulgarian language, in Ukrainian language, in Gagauzien language. So they do promote the minorities. Maybe it's not enough time, but still there is a time which is dedicated to the minorities.
But would you say that, well, there are some exceptions, as you said, but in the large picture, would you say that every minority stays a little bit in its media world? Is it a kind of bubble then they are living in? Are they living in a different bubble than the Moldavian majority?
Well, in Moldova, we have two languages which is more used. It's a Romanian language and it's a Russian language. So speaking about Russian language, there is no any difficulty and there is no any restrictions. It's quite dominated together with Romanian language. If to speak about other languages and other minorities like Bulgarian minority or Gagauzien minority, you will not see at the national level some of the TV channels or radio stations or radio outlets. At the public TV, you would see some time dedicated. I'm not sure how much and what periodicity and how it is everything regulated, but in those territories where they live predominantly, they do have a media coverage as well.
But
so I would not say,
does their media coverage cover also national topics? Do the minorities speak about the others? Do the Russian minorities speak about, let's say, the young Moldavians who are going to the European Union, or is there a disinterest?
No. I think it is quite often discussed national issues, not only those related to the, especially for the minorities, or the local or regional issues. I would say that it's quite comprehensive discussions on different levels.
So you don't
It's
see
quite
that as a
inclusive.
problem? You don't
No,
see
it's
that
not.
as a problem?
We did not perceive or feel it that will be an issue with inclusiveness. So it's quite everything which is dominated the national level interests or discussions or the issues or problems. It is also discussed at the level of the minorities. Maybe I would find some other issues for very small minorities, like Roman minorities, which living in the one of the regions in the north of the country. I did not hear of any TV channels which they would be predominantly in that area. So, but generally speaking, those big minorities which are in Moldova, they do have media coverage.
Mm-hmm. And do you feel that the young journalists who are growing up in this very specific and very particular world of Moldovan media, are they prepared to create perhaps another, a modern, a more englobing generation of media? Do you think there is a good formation for those young people?
Well, with the high technologies that we have, it's very easy now to deliver a product, to produce something, and then to deliver using the social network or other means of communication. It's really very easy in these days to really produce something and to deliver those projects to many recipients. Of course, we have basic in education in terms of journalism faculty at the state university. We see many young professionals coming to TV channels or radio channels, working in different levels at the different institutions, state institutions or political parties, or even private sector. So there are many young talented people which really making very good progress. It's also about perspectives, and it's also about limits that the young generation have in the country. Of course, to have a better education and to have more opportunities, most of them or part of them, they decide to leave the country and to find those opportunities in other countries, and especially in the countries of European Union, that it's much easier now to travel, and it's much easier now to find those opportunities. Many Moldovans living abroad in European Union. We estimate less than 1 million of people, Moldovans, living in European Union. So everybody has some relatives, families already in Italy, in Spain, in France, in Germany, in UK, and people trying their luck. Let's say young generation is trying their luck, and it's not only about journalism, of course, in many other industries and areas.
Okay.
So there is no limitation, and for some of them it's much easier to go to Romania, because Romania is also providing many scholarships. And then after Romania, jumping in other countries.
Okay, so as you know, ADAMI is of course wishing that those brilliant young journalists stay in the country and work on an improvement of journalism, and this is why this program is existing, and this is the transition to Philomena, who will present us once again the idea and the program, please.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to say a few words about the ADAMI Media Prize, because right now we have the competition going on. And so it might be interesting for some participants to apply. So right now, yeah, so the ADAMI Media Prize is an annual award for TV, film, different video formats that have the content of cultural diversity. So it's always very important that to stay with this ethnic and or religious diversity. And right now we have the competition. So people from the Eastern Partnership countries can apply their work, and there is 6 different categories. So you can apply documentary films, fiction films, news, TV shows. The just important part is that it has this content of cultural diversity and that it comes from the 6 Eastern Partnership countries. So it has to be either have been broadcast or screened at festivals or published online. So there's also online categories. And then there is 6 main awards and also fellowships, special mentions, and so on. So there will be at the end of the year the award ceremony. And you can get all the information on our website, ADAMIMediaPrize.eu. So I think that's the main information. And I want to remind you again now, before we come to the question and answers, that you can raise your hands in Zoom. So there is this function here. If you click on the participants, you have on the bottom this raise your hand function. So I would invite you now to ask your questions to Mr. Candu about media and diversity in Moldova and in the, let's say, maybe post-Soviet sphere or Eastern Partnership region. And of course, you can also put your questions in the chat if you want. So we have one question by Darius Roby. We will unmute you now.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Cool. I just wanted to ask Mr. Candu if there have been differences in coverage of the coronavirus pandemic between Russophone and Romanian language media in Moldova.
Sorry, I missed part of your question related to pandemic.
Correct. Have there been differences in the coverage between Russian and Romanian language media in Moldova?
No, generally, thank you very much for the question. No, generally, each of the TV channels, they try to switch between languages, so they have time for in Russian speaking and also in Romanian language. And starting with advertising and also the news, it's quite pretty well covered in both languages, everything which relates to pandemic. So, and we are talking about advertising about pandemic and measures of protection, so advertising generally. And we are talking about the decisions taken by the authorities. We're talking about news. So it's pretty well covered in both languages.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have another question? Here we have CBC TV.
Hello.
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 My name is Medina. I represent Azerbaijan TV channel CBC. And my question is not about media, but I want to ask it in the context of cultural diversity. Azerbaijan and Moldova have a lot in common. In your opinion, what areas can be developed more in relationship between these two countries? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, both countries has quite the same history in terms of Soviet Union, and we call for those post-Soviet nations in terms of mentality somehow Homo Sovieticus, and both countries went through, as other countries, as Ukraine and other countries like Georgia, we went through some transition period of time through different type of economies and institutions, looking somehow for the new models of development. And there are many similarities. In both countries, we face quite the same problems in terms of building institutions, building the media legislation, freedom of speech and freedom of media. So in both countries are mentioned sometimes oftener, sometimes less, before Council of Europe for some of the issues, as well as for good results in some of the areas of development. So of course, the biggest problems I would see, or the common issues, is the less opportunities for the young generation. So I believe, like in Moldova, from Azerbaijan, many young people leaving the country and looking for other opportunities in different other countries in the region or outside. And that's also due to this transition period of time. Also, Azerbaijan is, let's say, from an economic point of view, much better conditions because of your infrastructure and oil and the gas access. At the same time, we have new institutions, new legislation, which still has to be implemented, and people to learn new things, because in countries, developed countries like France, like Germany, many things happened maybe 50 years ago, and we have to recover in a very short period of time and to learn. And always we are in the and the things are moving on, so everything is developing very fast sometimes, and we have to catch up and to learn from moving on. And of course, it's also about small markets. In this respect, if to speak about media, it's about quite a small markets comparing to developed countries. And when you have a small market, then it's much difficult to build independent institutions and generally business in the media, and to create opportunities and to create jobs for including for the young generations, stay in the country and they don't leave. Both countries went through some difficulties also in wars, in minorities issues, and you have Nagorno-Karabakh issue, we have Transnistrian issue. So, and all this had the impact also in the country, in people, in their destinies and life. And it's not easy to overpass, you need time to recover. So many similarities, but at the same time, differences, but many common for us. Many issues are common in terms of market, institutions, young generation leaving the country, and we have to find those opportunities in the country to keep people, or to make it in a way that they come back, because human resources and generally people are the most important resource for any country, including for Moldova and including for Azerbaijan.
Okay, thank you. We have one more question by Nino Zanzava.
Do you hear me?
Yes, yeah, now we hear you.
My question is may sound more provocative or controversial, because it's about seeing, or possibility of seeing, cultural diversity as some kind of misfortune in politically unstable regions. For example, manipulation of Russian-speaking population. We have seen that this frequently and often cause problems in regions originally not dominated by Russian populations. For example, towards the end of the 80s in Transnistria, they have outnumbered ethnic Moldovans, and would you see migration of population towards future war zones by Russians during Soviet time, for example, as a deliberate act performed by Russia, and as a continuation of its colonialist politics? I will add one more small comment also. Russians have been intensively involved also in Russification of the population in post-conflict zones as well. For example, I come from Abkhazia, and after Abkhaz-Georgian conflict, Russians somehow persuaded most of the population to take Russian passports. So now they have even more legitimation to defend the interests of its citizens. So what would you consider as a possibility to naturalize this kind of politics? Russian politics, like this kind of long planned and two-faced politics. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. Of course, your example related to Abkhazia is quite similar for what we have with the Transnistria, because we see a massive granting the citizenship, Russian citizenship, to the locals living in Transnistria. Based on some estimations, we are talking about 250,000 or maybe 300,000 Russian citizens already with, Transnistrians, let them call Transnistrians, or population from living in Transnistria, which already holds the Russian passports and have the Russian citizenship. First. Second, of course, it's no surprise. It's nothing new already after so many years to understand that that was the policy of the Soviet Union or the stakeholders in Soviet Union, those who took these decisions to mix in a way the population and the territories. So if one day, for example, Moldova or Ukraine or Baltic states or Georgia will claim independence or sovereignty, to pop up some conflicts and to have then the zones of influence. And that happened with Transnistria as well. That happened in Georgia with Abkhazia and Ossetia, and in Armenia and of course Azerbaijan, it's about Nagorno-Karabakh. Now we see in Ukraine what is happening in the eastern side of Ukraine and Crimea. So this is the way of dealing with the territories and with the countries, neighbor countries, in order to keep control over those regions. And it's not only about territories and it's not only about population, but it's also about language. It's also about the issue of the language, if to speak about the cultural things and elements. For example, in Transnistria region, it's not recognized the Moldovan language, Romanian language, as it is in the rest of Moldova, because we write with the Latin alphabet, but the Transnistrian authorities kept for the Moldovan language the Cyrillic alphabet, still from the Soviet Union. Moreover, the Russian-speaking schools are quite, if not limited, but quite, let's say, I would say there are many obstacles created artificially for them to have a proper and free activity in the Transnistria region. So we always have problems within these schools. The policemen or militia coming for different events, threatening professors, children, parents. So we still have issues, fundamental issues with the human rights in the region of Transnistria, because we see such kind of abuses from the so-called Transnistrian authorities, which are self-proclaimed authorities. And speaking about the media, of course, media is a very good tool, and generally information, and this hybrid war, which is used as an instrument, as a tool, speaking about the manipulation, disinformation, this everything active, also in Moldova, in Transnistria, in Ukraine, and many other countries in the region, because this is a way of, if last century the territories, the population, and the conventional wars were those in place, now today the information, disinformation, and manipulation, this is the most important tool, you know, to influence the decisions, to influence politicians, to influence the security of the countries. And it's quite similar, and it's quite the same situation as in Abkhazia or Ossetia, what is happening in Georgia, also is happening in Transnistria. Russification and also the citizenship, problems with the schools, which are where children are learning in Romanian language, and many other like this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we don't have much time anymore because Miss Ollivier has to leave soon because she has to catch a train. But we have 2 more questions. So I would suggest maybe if it will be too long, Miss Ollivier will just leave the conversation and we will continue the question and answer. So the next question is about, so from the beginning, I would like to contradict Mr. Candu regarding the statement that it's easy to reach readers. It is not an easy job, as it is not for politicians to reach the voters with their message. But let us speak about freedom of the media in Moldova. What are the causes of the challenges that the media outlets in Moldova are facing? Is it because of poor legislative regulations, or are there any other reasons for this?
Well, speaking about the reaching the recipients of the information, I was meaning that it's much easier today with the high technologies. For example, I am now in opposition, so it's much difficult for me to have access to some TV outlets, for example. Therefore, with my colleagues, with the staff that I'm working, we have decided to organize live sessions using Facebook or other means in order to deliver the message and in order to communicate with population from a political point of view, and not only. So it's much easier today to organize a small studio and to deliver those messages than comparing to the last century, or let's say what was happening 10 years or 15 years ago. So that's what I was meaning by saying that it's easier to deliver the message. What is the media generally facing in Moldova? It's not only about legislation, which partially can be right, saying that it's a legislation which is always in transformation, transition, and in implementation. At the same time is the politicization, or let's say the political class is trying to control and to have their own tools. And in this way, the regulator, I believe, strongly believe that it's not independent as it should be. And another challenge is the size of the market in terms of money, in terms of business-wise, because in a small market, which is shrinked for the last 10 years, it's much difficult to even have proper advertising and to gain income by selling advertise to cover the costs of, let's say, maintaining costs. Therefore, a new legislation or the new approach and new tools are necessary to be implemented. I was mentioning before the legislation called cash rebate legislation, which means that the country will give back part of the investments if a foreign investor will invest in media in Moldova, 20-25%. I know Georgia went, I think, up to 30%. If, let's say, if that product has also some national, traditional, or cultural element, it has also 5 or 10% markup. So and many other things like this, from economic point of view, should be fixed in order to have a better situation of the media in Moldova.
Okay, thank you. Unfortunately, now Carolin Ollivier had to leave already to catch her train, and we couldn't really say goodbye to her. We have another question in the chat by Julia Gritsenko. Good afternoon. I have a following question. In context of the language diversity, how did the language quotas influence Moldovan TV market? Did it help to enlarge the amount of national content on the TV stations? As a former Speaker of Parliament, what is your opinion about the need of inclusion of Transnistria in terms of creating target content for those territories?
Thank you very much, Julia, for the question. Speaking about the main two languages, Romanian language and Russian language, I do not see any problems by using and speaking about the diversity or the inclusion of the Russian speakers, because it's quite well and it's common to use the Russian language especially in TV outlets. If to speak about the quotas, maybe I will try to make an estimation, but I would say 60% is Romania, or maybe 65% Romanian language, 35% Russian language, if to speak about the national level. In terms of other minorities, mostly when we speak about the Bulgarian minority or Gagauzian minority, which is a Turkish type of minority, there is a concentration of media in those regions, and mainly in Russian language, or in some quotas also there are languages like Gagauzians or Bulgarian. I did not really see any issues raised by the minorities that their quotas or their part is not significantly promoted. So I would not see a big problem with the minorities and promotion of the languages at the different level. At the national level, it is true, dominated by Romanian language and Russian language. If to speak about the inclusion of the Transnistria in terms of creating target content for those territories, well, the problem is that the Transnistrian authorities, they banned the broadcast of the Moldovan TV channels, for example. So you would not really be able, being in Transnistria, to have access to those TV outlets which are broadcasting from Chisinau or from a region which is controlled by the official government. Only in some territories. So there is an issue with banning the TV outlets, banning the telecommunication generally, banning some online outlets or channels. So, and for example, in Chisinau, you would not be able to watch anything or almost anything which is produced in Transnistria. So this is an issue which has to be on the agenda of the political class and those stakeholders, to find a way to liberalize the market and the flow of information from both sides.
I would also have a question. How did the situation and what happened in Ukraine in 2014 change the situation in Moldova maybe as well? Or did it have an influence? Because I remember even in Germany, there started a big wave of Russian propaganda, for example. And it was like switched off. And so did it also have an influence? Did something change in Moldova? And for example, there was also in 2015 then these protests and the Moldovan Maidan. So what about this relationship to Ukraine and these events that happened with Crimea and the war in the east?
Well, of course, everything which happened in Ukraine caught very much attention of the Moldovans and Moldova, because it's a neighbor country. And actually what was happening in 2014 and 15, starting with Crimea and eastern part of Ukraine, it's something that we went through already with the Transnistrian conflict. So this had an impact, a positive impact, that the Ukrainians understood how important it is to cooperate from a security point of view with Moldova, and what a danger can be generated by the Transnistria if not to try to somehow control the situation. I'm not talking about controlling the territories as it is. For example, the Moldovan government and Ukrainian government in the last 2 years, except this year, but previously, have managed to open on the territory of Ukraine, so on the Ukrainian side, to set up joint border control of Moldova and Ukraine in order to seek to have like to control the border of Moldova on the Transnistrian level, because before it was a border which was not controlled by the Moldovan authorities, only by Ukrainian authorities, and so-called Transnistrian authorities had their own border police there. It helped also to have a better relationship with Ukraine, between Moldova and Ukraine, to understand the issue with energy, for example, in terms of energy security, because Moldova managed with Ukraine to have a good deal in that Moldova started to buy the electricity from Ukraine. So people and the officials, the stakeholders, understood that it's much better to cooperate, and especially Ukrainians understood what does it mean to have like a Transnistria issue. At the same time, today we have a president in power in Moldova, which has a quite still high popularity comparing to other politicians or other political officials. He has a popularity of 20–25%, and at the same time he openly stated that the Crimea is a territory of Russia, and he is of course not very welcomed in Ukraine and in Kiev. So somehow we have a very interesting situation. On one side, we have a president which is not recognizing Ukrainian rights on Crimea, and it's not welcome in Ukraine or in Romania, for example, and at the same time, he is still endorsed by 20–25% of population. On one, summarizing, what happened in Ukraine gave the possibility to have stronger cooperation with Ukraine previously in the previous governments for the, let's say, 2015, 16, 17, 18, those years. At the same time, it's the influence of Russia, particularly this year, 2019, and this year is increasing in Moldova. And we are not talking only about TV, or we're not talking about only media, but we are talking about energy, we are talking about intelligence. This is it.
Okay, thank you. One more question by Stefan Tolz.
Thank you.
I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Wonderful, because Carolin wanted to write to everyone and then it ended up in a private chat to me. I just want to read it. Thank you, Mr. Candu. Thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure hosting you, and have a good afternoon. Carolin didn't just leave, so she wanted to say at least thank you. I want to say thank you also, Mr. Candu, for taking your time. Maybe one little question for me, that on a scale from 1 to 5, where do you see at the moment the journalism and the freedom of journalism and the quality of journalism in Moldova? If 1 is really poor and 5 is great, where do you see it? And because I'm a filmmaker and I know the tax-free regime is really an important, very important part for investment in the media, I totally agree. But what needs to be done on the journalistic quality? Because I think that's really also a question, because as long as there are big political parties or people with money that are also interested in politics, it's always difficult for journalists to be really independent and to really ask critical questions. So what needs to be done?
Well, let me try by giving a rate, trying to be in the middle, in that middle age, 2.5. There is still plenty to do in order to improve the situation of the journalism, to be more professional and independent. And that's starting with quality in the school, I mean education, from a faculty of journalism at the university, ending with legislation, ending with independent regulator, and also with economic situation, because when the economy is growing, you have investments, you have companies which are advertising more. Then, of course, you as a TV outlet, you sell more advertise, you have more income, so you can invest in production, in people, in the quality, and not only about studios or technologies, we're talking about human resources. When you have a very small market, then you have limited resources, in financial resources also to invest in journalism. I personally had a feeling that we had a period of time, let's put it in this way, 2009, 10, 11, when we felt that everything is improving very well, and we had really an expectation and a belief and a hope that finally we start to grow in economy, in democracy, and including media. We had a couple of new TV channels with a very strong messages at that time being set up. They were launched in activity, independent TV outlets, also with some foreign investments behind. That was 2009, 2010, 11, so we had diversity. But then something happened in around 2000, I would say 15, 16, and we really felt down again in investments in the economy related to media. I'm talking, and also in the quality of journalism. So of course, I'm not a journalist. It's very difficult for me to, by myself, to come with an assessment. But as a person which I am interested to deliver the message, but at the same time to be able to get the message, we still see the media which is influenced. We see the media which is influenced by the political class. We see the media which is influenced by other countries like Russia Federation. So we see disinformation, we see manipulation, and inside and outside of the country. So still plenty of things to be improved.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Candu. I think now we are already very much over time, so we can close this talk now.
Thank you very much for organizing.
Thank you for these interesting insights into the Moldovan media landscape, and also for the parallels with other countries. It was very interesting, I think. So thank you very much for joining. Instead of Carolin, Ollivier, I'm like closing this now. And also I want to announce the next ADAMI Focus Talk, which will be in 1 week on the 30th of June. We will have the winner of the Literature Nobel Prize from Belarus, Svetlana Alexievich. I think it will be very interesting as well. So thank you for all of your participation and for the questions, and have a good day.
Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Have a good day.
Thank you.